What if you could build wealth without living like a monk or obsessing over every penny? The Lean Startup by Eric Ries isn't just another business book loaded with buzzwords or rigid corporate strategies. It's a game-changing framework for anyone trying to create something new in a world full of uncertainty. Whether you're launching a tech startup, building a small business, or leading innovation inside a big corporation, this book redefines how progress, growth, and success really happen. Ries flips the traditional build it and they will come mindset on its head. Instead of spending years perfecting a product only to find out no one wants it, the Lean Startup teaches you how to test ideas quickly, learn from real customer feedback, and adapt before it's too late. The focus isn't on working harder, it's on working smarter by building a system that learns fast and wastes nothing. Who is this book for? Visionaries with bold ideas, scrappy founders trying to survive their first year, entrepreneurs driving change from within, or anyone who wants to turn uncertainty into opportunity. Through this summary, you'll learn how to check build a minimum viable product, MVP, to validate ideas before investing too much. Check use real data, not assumptions, to drive every decision. Check pivot or persevere with clarity and confidence. Check create sustainable growth through powerful feedback loops. Ries's message is simple. You don't need a perfect plan. You need a system that learns and evolves. In a world where the only constant is change, the Lean Startup is your blueprint for building products, businesses, and teams that actually work. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. Start. Think about the last time you had a great idea. Maybe it hit you while you were stuck in traffic or taking a shower. It felt like lightning. You thought, this could be big. You told a few friends. They nodded. You imagined the logo, maybe even the launch party. So you dive in, you build, you plan, you grind, and then nothing. No traction, no users, no money. That's the brutal reality Eric Ries opens with in The Lean Startup. Chapter 1 is a wake-up call to every dreamer, builder, and founder. It doesn't matter how brilliant your idea is or how hard you work. If you're building something nobody wants, you're just wasting time, money, and energy. Eric learned this the hard way. He shares the story of IMVU, a company he co-founded. They spent 6 months building a product, a 3D avatar chat software that integrated with all the major messaging platforms like AIM and MSN. They thought, everyone already uses these platforms. If we make chatting more fun with avatars, it's going to be a hit. They launched it and waited and waited. But users didn't flood in. In fact, most people didn't even understand why they'd need avatars. Worse, they were hesitant to share their login details with a weird new app. IMVU had invested months of effort building something no one wanted. It wasn't a product problem, it was a learning problem. This is where Eric drops the hammer. Most startups don't fail because they can't build stuff. They fail because they build the wrong stuff. So what's the fix? That's what this book and this chapter is all about. Let's get something straight. When Ries says startup, he doesn't just mean a small business. He defines a startup as a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Think about that. Extreme uncertainty. That's the startup life. You don't know your customers yet. You don't know if your product will work. You don't even know what your product should be. That uncertainty is what makes startups different from established businesses. In an established company, you follow a plan, execute known processes, and improve on things that already work. In a startup, you're doing something brand new, so no plan survives first contact with reality. Yet most startups still follow a traditional business model. Write a detailed business plan, forecast revenue for 3 years, create a roadmap, raise funds, and build the perfect product before launch. Sounds smart, right? But here's the trap. That plan is based entirely on assumptions. What if your assumptions are wrong? This is where the lean startup method flips everything on its head. Instead of building, launching, and then learning what people want, you start by learning. The goal isn't to launch a product. The goal is to figure out what's worth building in the first place. This process is called validated learning, and it becomes the heartbeat of a lean startup. Validated learning means running experiments to test whether your ideas actually solve a problem for real people. Every feature you build, every campaign you run, every dollar you spend should teach you something useful. It's not about guessing, it's about gathering proof. Let's look at a classic example. Zappos. Today, it's a billion-dollar online shoe company, but in the beginning, founder Nick Swinmurn had no idea if people would actually buy shoes online. It sounded risky. Who wants to buy shoes without trying them on? So instead of building warehouses and writing code, Swinmurn went to local shoe stores, took pictures of shoes, and posted them on a simple website. When someone bought a pair, he went back to the store, bought the shoes, and shipped them out by hand. It wasn't scalable, it wasn't fancy, but it worked, and most importantly, it proved that people would buy shoes online. That's validated learning, and it saved him from wasting years on an idea that might have flopped. Another key concept Rees introduces is the minimum viable product, MVP. An MVP is the simplest version of your product that allows you to start the learning process. It's not your final masterpiece, it's a learning tool. The goal isn't to impress users with a perfect app. The goal is to start a conversation, to find out what matters. Now, this takes guts. Most founders want their first product to be flawless, but Rees says perfection is a trap. You can't learn if no one's using your product, and people won't use it if you wait until it's perfect. That brings us to another myth, the big launch. In movies, startups launch with champagne, confetti, maybe a dramatic TED Talk. In real life, that big launch often leads to a big flop because you only get one shot and you don't even know if your aim is right. With Lean Startup, you don't wait for a launch. You launch early, you launch often, you learn. So how do you know if you're making progress? Traditional metrics like revenue or profit don't mean much in the early stages. Instead, you focus on how quickly you're learning. Rise introduces the idea of innovation accounting, a way to measure learning and progress before your startup has customers or cash flow. And at the heart of this system is a feedback loop. Build, measure, learn. You build an MVP. You measure how people respond, and you learn from the results. Then you repeat. Each cycle gets you closer to a product that people actually want. This loop isn't just a process. It's a mindset. It teaches you to stay humble, to stay curious, and to stay fast. Instead of assuming you know everything, you assume you know nothing, and you test until you do. And finally, Rees calls for a new kind of leadership. Startup founders aren't just visionaries, they're scientists. Their job isn't to execute a perfect plan. Their job is to discover the right plan through rapid experimentation. If you take away just one idea from this chapter, let it be this. A startup is not about building a product. It's about building a system that can learn what the customer really wants. The faster you learn, the better your odds of success. Because in the world of startups, the race doesn't go to the fastest coder, the slickest marketer, or the most well-funded team. It goes to the one who learns the fastest. Chapter 2. Define. Let's talk about what a startup really is. Not the fantasy version we see in movies, but the real, messy, uncertain experience of trying to bring something new into the world. In this chapter, Eric Ries gets to the core of it. Before you can measure progress, before you can decide what to build, you need to define what you're doing. A startup, as Ries defines it, isn't just a product, a website, or an app. It's a learning machine. Its job isn't to execute a fixed plan. It's to discover a sustainable business model. That's why the traditional definitions of progress, like working through a to-do list or launching new features, don't always make sense. You could spend months coding and designing, but if you're building something no one wants, you're not making progress. You're just polishing failure. The first big idea in this chapter is that startups operate under conditions of extreme uncertainty. There's no playbook, no guaranteed market, no proven product. That's what makes defining your startup so hard and so important. You have to make decisions with incomplete information, and you have to do it fast. To illustrate this, Reese shares a story from his time at IMVU. They were building a complex product with features their team thought were essential, but customers didn't care. The problem wasn't in the execution, it was in the assumptions. They had never clearly defined what success meant in terms of customer behavior, so they were chasing shadows. That's where the lean startup method changes the game. Instead of asking, "Can we build this?" you ask, "Should we build this?" and "Are we learning what we need to learn?" This mindset shift leads us to the next big concept. Startup metrics need to reflect validated learning, not vanity. Traditional companies rely on metrics like revenue, profit margins, and market share. But if your startup doesn't even know what your customer really wants, those numbers are meaningless. Validated learning means proving, with data, that your efforts are creating real value for customers. It's not about feeling productive, it's about being productive in a way that actually moves the needle. Think of it like going to the gym. If your goal is to get fit, you don't just measure how much time you spend there. You measure your progress, your strength, endurance, flexibility. In the same way, startups shouldn't measure hours worked or lines of code. They should measure learning. So how do you define progress when your goal is to learn? That's where hypotheses come in. Rees recommends that every startup define its core assumptions as testable statements. These are your leap of faith assumptions, the beliefs that have to be true for your business to succeed. For example, if you're launching a new budgeting app, your assumptions might be, people are frustrated with their current budgeting tools. They're willing to switch to a new solution. They'll pay $5 per month for a better experience. Each of those assumptions can be tested. That's how you turn an idea into a structured experiment. You don't need to guess, you need to learn. Now, here's the challenge. Many founders don't want to test their assumptions. Why? Because deep down, they're afraid they'll be proven wrong. They want to believe in the vision. But ignoring reality doesn't make it go away, it just delays the failure. In lean startup thinking, being wrong isn't a failure, it's a win, as long as you learn from it. The faster you can prove an assumption wrong, the faster you can pivot and find something that works. This brings us to one of the most powerful ideas in this chapter, the build, measure, learn loop. It's the cycle every startup must move through. Build something small, measure how customers respond, and learn whether your idea holds up. Here's the trick, though. The loop starts with learning, not building. You figure out what you need to learn, then build only what's necessary to measure it. This forces you to keep things simple and focused. Rise introduces the term minimum viable product, MVP, again here, emphasizing its role in learning. The MVP isn't a stripped-down version of your dream product. It's the smallest thing you can build to start learning about your customers. It's a conversation starter, not a final draft. Think of Dropbox. Before building their full product, they made a simple video showing how the software would work. That video got thousands of sign-ups. It proved demand without writing a single line of code. That's the power of defining your assumptions and testing them early. Another key takeaway from this chapter is the importance of actionable metrics over vanity metrics. Vanity metrics like total downloads, page views, or social media likes can make you feel good, but they don't tell you what's really happening. Actionable metrics, on the other hand, show cause and effect. They help you understand how changes in your product or strategy actually affect customer behavior. Let's say your app's downloads went up last month. That sounds great, but why? Was it because of your new pricing, your updated design, a viral tweet? If you don't know, that metric isn't helping you make better decisions. That's the danger of vanity metrics. They create the illusion of progress. To stay grounded, Rees suggests defining your engine of growth, the system by which your startup acquires and retains customers. There are a few types: the viral engine, where users bring in other users; the sticky engine, where customers stay long-term; and the paid engine, where you earn more from each customer than you spend to acquire them. Each engine has its own key metrics. Defining your engine helps you focus your experiments and measure the right things. It turns the chaos of startup life into a structured learning journey. At the end of the day, this chapter is about discipline. It's easy to fall into the trap of build fast, break things, but speed without direction is dangerous. You could be sprinting toward a cliff. The lean startup method gives you a compass. It teaches you to define your destination, question your assumptions, and build only what helps you learn. That's the heart of Chapter 2. Define what matters. Define what success looks like. Define what you believe and test it relentlessly. Because in a startup, clarity is everything, and speed is only useful if you're headed the right way. Chapter 3. Learn. Let's start with a tough truth. Startups exist not to make stuff, not to serve customers, not even to make money, at least not at first. Startups exist to learn. That's the entire purpose. In a world full of uncertainty, what separates the startups that succeed from those that vanish is their ability to learn faster than everyone else. This chapter goes deep into what Eric Ries calls validated learning, a core concept of the lean startup method. Validated learning isn't just trial and error. It's not, let's try this and see what happens. It's a systematic, measurable way to test your assumptions about what your customers actually want. And it's backed by real data, not just feelings or hunches. Now think about how traditional businesses measure success. You've got goals, deadlines, and key performance indicators, things like revenue, profit margins, and market share. That's great when you're running a stable, known business. But what if you don't even know what business you're in yet? In a startup, measuring success by traditional standards can be incredibly misleading. You could be generating buzz, gaining users, even pulling in some revenue. But if none of that is proving your core assumptions, you're just creating noise. You're not actually getting closer to product market fit. So how do you learn the right things? Rise says it starts by treating your startup like a scientific experiment. You start with a hypothesis, something like, people will use this budgeting app daily to track their spending. That's a testable statement. You don't just assume it's true. You find a way to prove or disprove it with real behavior. That's what validated learning looks like. It's not based on intuition or opinions. It's grounded in evidence. To drive this point home, Ries revisits the IMVU story. The team there was doing what most startup teams do. They were building features, shipping code, running marketing campaigns. But when they looked at their customer data, they realized something shocking. The features they spent the most time on were barely being used. Customers didn't care. They were using the product in ways the team never intended. That was the light bulb moment. They weren't learning from their customers. They were projecting their own ideas onto them. The lean startup approach forces you to flip that around. You don't build and then learn. You learn, then build, then measure, then learn again. This brings us to a key principle. If you're not learning, you're wasting time. Ries is brutally honest here. He says the only real progress a startup makes is through learning. Everything else, writing code, designing logos, pitching investors, is just overhead. Valuable, yes, but secondary. If you're not learning what customers want, you're not making progress. Let's pause and imagine a typical day in a startup. The team is working 12-hour shifts. They're fixing bugs, answering emails, posting on social media, launching updates. Everyone's exhausted, but it feels productive. You're hustling. But what if none of that work helped you understand your customer better? What if you're just getting better at building the wrong product? That's the danger of false progress. It looks and feels like success, but it's just motion, not movement, not growth, not traction. So how do you make sure you're learning the right things? First, you must identify your leap of faith assumptions. These are the big, bold beliefs your startup is built on. Things like busy parents will pay $15 per month for a meal planning service, or young professionals want a no-code website builder with drag-and-drop simplicity. Every startup has at least two core assumptions: the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis. The value hypothesis tests whether a product actually delivers value to the customer. Do they like it? Do they keep using it? Would they be upset if it disappeared? The growth hypothesis tests how new customers will discover the product. Will people tell their friends? Will ads work? Will users return on their own? Your job is to design experiments to test both. Let's take an example. Say you're building a productivity app for freelancers. You believe they're drowning in tasks and need better tools. Instead of building a full-featured app, you start with a landing page explaining your concept. You ask visitors to sign up for early access. Maybe you even send them a sample feature via email. If nobody signs up, that's learning. If people sign up but don't click on the feature, that's more learning. If they click and send feedback, now you're learning something useful. Every action they take or don't take is data. That's validated learning in action. Now, here's the hard part. Learning often means admitting you were wrong. Maybe your idea wasn't as exciting as you thought. Maybe that must-have feature is actually a distraction. But the faster you uncover those truths, the faster you can pivot or adapt. And here's where Reese gets blunt. Startups that succeed are those that manage to iterate enough times before running out of resources. That's it. If you learn fast, you get more chances to adjust, improve, and get closer to something customers actually want. That's why your MVP, minimum viable product, is so important. It's not your product's light version. It's your learning vehicle. You build the smallest thing possible that lets you test your assumptions and get feedback. And the MVP isn't just for tech products. Rise shares the example of Food on the Table, a grocery shopping service. Instead of building a complex algorithm right away, the founder manually created meal plans and grocery lists for a handful of families. He met them in person, took notes, and learned what they liked. Only after validating the idea did he invest in automation. That's lean startup thinking. Don't assume, learn, and don't confuse learning with failure. If your test fails, that's good. It means you've learned what doesn't work, and now you can try something else. In a traditional business, failure is shameful. In a lean startup, failure is feedback. In the end, this chapter is about humility. It's about recognizing that you don't know what your customers want, but you can find out. And the sooner you do, the better your odds of success. The real product of a startup isn't the app, the website, or the physical item. The real product is learning. Everything else is a byproduct. Because the startup that learns the fastest is the startup that wins. Chapter 4. Experiment. Think of a startup not as a miniature version of a big company, but as an experiment engine, one designed to answer a single burning question: are we building something that people really want? In this chapter, Eric Ries doubles down on the idea that everything in a startup should be viewed as an experiment, not just marketing strategies or pricing models, but even the product itself. Every feature, every line of code, every design tweak, it all exists to test an assumption. You're not just building, you're experimenting, observing, learning. Rise kicks things off by making a bold comparison. Startups need to operate like scientists. Now that might sound strange if you're used to the move fast and break things mantra of startup culture. But here's the twist. Scientists move fast too. They just don't guess. They hypothesize, test, and adjust based on evidence. That's how startups should operate. He emphasizes that good experiments start with clear hypotheses. And here's where most startups mess up. They confuse launching a product with testing an idea. Reyes argues that the product itself is the experiment. If you're not testing a specific assumption about your customers with that product, then you're just building in the dark. Let's break this down with a simple example. Suppose you're launching an app that helps people find local hiking trails. You might have two key hypotheses. Hikers have a hard time discovering new, high-quality trails nearby. They'd be willing to pay $4.99 per month for access to a curated list with trail reviews, maps, and GPS features. Those are your leap of faith assumptions. If either one of them is wrong, your entire business idea crumbles. So instead of spending 6 months building a feature-rich app, what if you created a basic web page? Maybe it just offers to email users one top-rated local trail per week. You run some Facebook ads. See who signs up. That's your first experiment. If no one bites, maybe the problem you're solving isn't real. Or maybe they want it for free. Either way, you've learned something crucial and fast. Now compare that to spending $50,000 and half a year building the full app, only to realize after launch that no one really wanted it. That's the traditional startup trap. Building before testing, assuming instead of experimenting. One of the most powerful ideas in this chapter is that the success of a startup isn't based on how fast it builds. It's how fast it learns. That learning comes from structured experiments. Reyes explains that startup experiments should follow the scientific method. Start with a clear hypothesis. Build a minimum viable product, MVP, to test it. Define what success looks like. Measure the results honestly. Decide whether to pivot or persevere. The MVP is critical here. Remember, it's not about launching a stripped-down product just to get something out. It's about learning the most with the least effort. If your MVP isn't helping you test a core business assumption, it's not doing its job. Let's take another real-world example Reese discusses. Aardvark, a social search engine that eventually got acquired by Google. Before building anything, the founders wanted to test if people would actually ask and answer questions through a network of friends. So they didn't build a complex backend or a sleek app. They used email. When someone asked a question, a person on the team would manually route it to someone they thought might know the answer. It was messy, it wasn't scalable, but it worked. It validated their assumption that people preferred getting answers from their network over anonymous forums. That kind of scrappy experimentation is the heart of the lean startup approach. You're not aiming for perfect, you're aiming for truth. Truth about what customers want, how they behave, and what they'll pay for. Rees also talks about innovation accounting, a way to track the results of your experiments. This isn't about vanity metrics like downloads or likes. It's about real indicators that you're on the right track. Metrics like user retention, activation rates, referral numbers, numbers that reflect customer behavior and engagement. Let's say you launch your MVP and 1,000 people sign up. That's exciting, right? But what if 900 never come back after the first use? That's not growth, that's a leak in your experiment. The data's not just for bragging, it's a signal to learn from. Experiments also help prevent what Rees calls success theater. That's when startups celebrate growth that isn't tied to real, sustainable progress. For example, throwing money at ads to spike downloads looks great on paper, but if those users churn the next day, it's not success, it's noise. That's why defining success metrics before the experiment begins is so important. You need to know what success looks like ahead of time, or you'll be tempted to interpret results in a way that confirms your hopes instead of testing your assumptions. Another key point Rees makes is about speed, but not in the way most startups think. The fastest startups aren't the ones that launch the most features or write the most code. They're the ones that run the most learning cycles. That means designing, building, testing, and learning over and over again. Build, measure, learn. That loop is everything. And each time you complete that loop, you get closer to a business model that actually works. That's the goal. Not just launching, not just growing, but building something real that customers love and are willing to pay for. In the end, this chapter is a shift in mindset. It's about seeing your startup not as a product-building machine, but as a learning lab. It's about letting go of the idea that success is measured by how many features you launch or how polished your pitch deck is. Instead, success means proving, step by step, that you're solving a real problem and that people care. Because if you're not experimenting, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're not growing. You're just guessing. Startups don't fail because they can't build. They fail because they build the wrong thing. And the only way to avoid that is to experiment with discipline, with purpose, and with urgency. Chapter 5. Leap. Every startup journey begins with a leap, not a safe, calculated step, but a jump into the unknown. In this chapter, Eric Ries explores how startups must embrace uncertainty, make bold assumptions, and then quickly put those assumptions to the test. It's not about avoiding risk, it's about managing it intelligently. Ries opens the chapter by challenging a common myth that startups can succeed through pure execution. Just follow the business plan, work hard, build fast, and you'll win, right? Not quite. In reality, execution without learning is just running faster in the wrong direction. Startups face a unique kind of risk, the risk of building something no one wants. That's why Ries argues that startups must identify and test their leap of faith assumptions. These are the foundational beliefs your startup is built on. If even one of them is wrong, your whole business model could collapse. There are two types of leap of faith assumptions you need to focus on. The value hypothesis. This tests whether your product or service actually delivers value to the customer. Will people find it useful? Will they come back and use it again? The growth hypothesis. This tests how new customers will discover your product. Will they share it? Will they see an ad and click? Will they stick around? Imagine you're building a fitness app for new moms. Your value hypothesis might be that these moms don't have time for long workouts, so they'll love short, guided 10-minute routines they can do at home. Your growth hypothesis might be that moms will recommend it to other moms through parenting Facebook groups. Both of those assumptions are leaps. They haven't been proven, so your first goal as a founder isn't to build a polished app. It's to find out if those assumptions are true. This is where Ries reintroduces the minimum viable product, MVP, as your first parachute after the leap. It's your experiment in a box. Not a beta version of your product, but a tool to test your leap of faith assumptions quickly and cheaply. Ries emphasizes that building an MVP isn't about shortcuts. It's about strategy. You're not trying to cut corners, you're trying to cut waste. If your assumption turns out to be false, it's better to find out in week 1 than in month 12. Let's go back to IMVU, Ries's own startup. Their original leap of faith was that people would want to use their 3D avatars to chat with friends through existing instant messaging platforms. So they spent 6 months building integrations with AIM, MSN, and Yahoo Messenger. The result? A total flop. People didn't care about those integrations. Worse, they were suspicious about giving their login credentials to a new product. If IMVU had tested that assumption earlier, with a simple MVP, maybe just asking users to connect IMVU to their messenger, they would have realized their mistake before wasting time and resources. This is the essence of the chapter. You must leap, yes, but leap wisely. Start with a bold vision, but test it ruthlessly. Don't fall in love with your idea. Fall in love with the process of learning. Reyes explains that most great startup stories include moments of surprising discovery, things that weren't in the original plan. Twitter started as a side project inside a podcasting company. YouTube began as a dating site. These companies made a leap, but they also paid attention to what they learned along the way. That's what allowed them to pivot into something great. And here's a powerful point Rees makes. A startup is not just a product. It's a catalyst for change. You're trying to change the world in some small or big way. But to do that, you have to deal with people, customers. And people are complicated. They don't always behave how you expect. That's why experimentation is critical. To make effective leaps, Rees suggests startups follow 3 steps. Identify your riskiest assumptions. These are the beliefs that, if proven false, would kill your business. Turn those assumptions into testable hypotheses. Make them specific and measurable. Design an experiment, usually an MVP, to test each one. Let's say you believe college students want a new way to manage group projects. That's your value hypothesis. You also believe they'll adopt the app through student influencers on TikTok. That's your growth hypothesis. Your MVP might be a simple web tool and a quick campaign using just one influencer. If students sign up and use it, great. You've validated your assumptions. If not, you've learned something priceless before investing too much. Another subtle but important lesson from this chapter is about vision versus reality. Many founders get trapped between their big picture dreams and the harsh truths revealed by their experiments. Rise encourages founders to hold tightly to their vision, but loosely to the path. That means being flexible about how you achieve your goal, even if it means making uncomfortable changes. Take Dropbox as an example. Drew Houston had a vision to simplify file sharing, but instead of building the full tech infrastructure first, they made a short explainer video. It didn't show the actual product, it just demonstrated how it would work. Thousands of people signed up. That validated the idea before they ever wrote the code. That kind of experiment isn't just smart, it's necessary. Because here's the deal, every startup has limited time, money, and energy. You can't afford to build blindly. Every day spent building something that won't work is a day wasted. Reyes ends the chapter by reminding us that entrepreneurship is not about gambling. It's not about taking wild risks or relying on luck. It's about managing risk, and that starts with identifying your biggest leaps and turning them into controlled, measurable tests. So, take the leap, but don't jump with your eyes closed. Jump with a hypothesis. Jump with a test. Jump ready to learn. Because the startups that survive aren't the ones that guess right. They're the ones that learn fast, adjust quickly, and never stop experimenting. Chapter 6. Test. This chapter is where the rubber meets the road. You've made the leap. You've defined your hypotheses. Now it's time to test them, but testing doesn't mean waiting until your product is ready or perfect. Testing starts now, immediately, with the absolute minimum you need to learn. Eric Ries opens this chapter by challenging our obsession with perfection. Most startups want to launch a polished product, The logic is, if it looks great and works smoothly, people will love it. But here's the trap. If you're building based on untested assumptions, then it doesn't matter how beautiful or functional your product is. If you're wrong about what customers want, all you've done is waste time in style. So Rees doubles down on the idea of the minimum viable product, MVP, a product that has just enough features to allow you to learn about your core assumptions. It's not supposed to be impressive. It's supposed to teach you something, quickly. But that's easier said than done. Most founders worry. What if people don't like it? What if they think it's buggy or incomplete? What if we look unprofessional? Rise addresses this fear head-on. The truth is, early adopters, the people most likely to try your MVP, expect it to be rough. They're not looking for polish, they're looking for value, and they're willing to forgive imperfections if the product solves a real problem. One of the most famous MVPs in startup history is Dropbox. Before building a full-fledged syncing engine with deep OS integration, founder Drew Houston made a simple 3-minute demo video. It showed how the product would work, drag and drop file syncing between devices. It wasn't a working product, but the response was explosive. Thousands of people signed up. That's the power of testing with creativity instead of code. Another great example comes from Food on the Table, a meal planning service. Instead of coding an app or building algorithms, the founder manually emailed recipes and shopping lists to a few families. He met with them weekly to understand their preferences. It was time-consuming and not scalable, but it worked. He learned exactly what people wanted before building a thing. That's what a good MVP does. It gets you in front of real users, fast. Ries also introduces the idea of concierge MVPs, a special kind of MVP where you deliver your service manually to each customer, like a personal concierge. There's no automation, no fancy software. You do the work yourself. Why? Because it helps you learn faster. You get direct feedback. You watch your customer use your product. You see what works and what doesn't. That insight is gold. The next step is measuring behavior. Once you launch your MVP, you need to track what customers do, not what they say. People will say nice things to spare your feelings, but their behavior tells the truth. Do they sign up? Do they come back? Do they refer friends? Are they willing to pay? That's where actionable metrics come in. Ries warns against vanity metrics, numbers that look good but don't help you make decisions. We got 10,000 page views last week. Cool. But did those views convert into users? Did they come back? Did they do anything meaningful? Instead, focus on things like activation rate. How many people who sign up actually use the product? Retention rate. Do people come back? Referral rate. Do users bring in others? Conversion rate. Do people upgrade or pay? Each of these metrics helps you understand whether your assumptions were correct. And here's the key. You have to define what success looks like before you run the test. If you wait until after, you'll always find a way to spin the numbers. You'll say, well, only 3% converted, but that's because we didn't market it right. That's not learning. It's rationalizing. You also have to resist the temptation to test too many things at once. Ries recommends focusing on the smallest batch of work that will allow you to get results. This ties back to the lean manufacturing principles that inspired the book. Work in small batches, test early, and reduce waste. Ries also touches on a powerful point here. Testing isn't just about validating your product. It's about validating your vision. You're not trying to find what works in general. You're trying to find what works to support your mission, your core purpose. Let's say you're building a fitness app because you believe busy parents need fast, effective workouts. If your MVP reveals that your users are actually hardcore gym rats who love 90-minute routines, you've learned something. But you also have to decide whether that's the direction you want to go. Testing is about more than just data. It's about making strategic decisions. So what if your MVP completely flops? That's still progress. Rise is clear. A failed MVP is not a failed startup. It's a successful experiment. You learned something critical early. Now you can pivot. But what if it works? What if people love it? Then it's time to double down. Build more, scale up, improve based on feedback. But even then, keep testing because customer needs evolve. Markets shift. What works today might not work next month. Throughout the chapter, Rees pushes founders to get out of the building. Don't just test from your desk. Talk to real users. Watch them use your product. Learn from their behavior. The insights you gain will shape everything that comes next. This chapter ends with a powerful reminder. In a startup, building is easy. Learning is hard. Anyone can write code or make a landing page. The real challenge is figuring out what customers actually want and being brave enough to admit when you're wrong. So you've made the leap. You've embraced your assumptions. Now it's time to test them, not in 6 months, but today. Not with perfection, but with purpose. Because the startups that test early learn fast. And the ones that learn fast win. Chapter 7, Measure. You've built your MVP, launched it, and now you've got data coming in. But here's the big question. What does all that data actually mean? Is your startup making real progress, or are you just staring at a bunch of numbers and telling yourself a comforting story? That's what this chapter is about. How to measure learning and progress with precision. Because if you don't have the right tools to measure your experiments, you can't make smart decisions. You'll either chase vanity metrics or fly blind, and both are recipes for disaster. Eric Ries opens this chapter with a simple truth. Startups exist to learn how to build a sustainable business. That means the only meaningful progress is measured through learning, and learning must be tracked. That's where innovation accounting comes in. Let's get something clear. Innovation accounting isn't about revenue or profit, at least not in the early stages. It's a system that helps you answer one question. Are we making progress toward a business model that works? So how do you do that? Ries breaks innovation accounting into 3 simple steps. Step 1, establish a baseline. The first thing you need to do is measure where you are right now. You've launched your MVP. Now watch what users do. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't interpret. Just observe. How many people sign up? How many use the product? How many come back? This raw baseline data is your reality check. It might be humbling. You might learn that only 8% of users stick around after the first week, or that just 1% actually pay. That's okay. You're here to learn, not to be perfect. Let's say your MVP is a new budgeting app. You launch it to 1,000 users. After 2 weeks, only 50 are using it regularly. That's a 5% retention rate. That's your starting point. You're not trying to scale yet. You're trying to learn how to improve that number. Step 2, tune the engine. Now that you've got your baseline, it's time to run experiments to improve those numbers. This is where learning happens. Try new features, tweak your messaging, change your onboarding flow, offer a discount, remove a step. With each change, you're running a new experiment. The question is, did it improve the metric you care about? Let's go back to the budgeting app. Maybe you notice users drop off right after the sign-up page. So you simplify the sign-up process. From 3 screens down to 1. You launch the update and track retention again. It jumps from 5% to 9%. That's measurable improvement. That's tuning the engine. But if the retention rate doesn't improve, or worse, it drops, you've also learned something. That change didn't help. You take that learning into the next experiment. The goal of this step isn't to get to perfection, it's to move the needle. 1% at a time. You don't have to win in one giant leap. You just have to keep improving in measurable, meaningful ways. Step 3. Pivot or persevere. After you've run several experiments, you face the most important decision a startup can make. Should we keep going in this direction or change course? If your metrics are improving, if users are coming back, telling friends and paying, you've validated your assumptions. You're learning. You should persevere. But if your metrics have flatlined, if you've tried multiple changes and nothing's working, it might be time to pivot, not out of panic, but based on evidence. This decision is hard. It's emotional. You've poured yourself into this idea, but the data doesn't lie. And the longer you wait to pivot, the more resources you burn. Rise emphasizes pivoting is not failing. It's a sign that you're doing real entrepreneurship, listening to feedback, adapting, and staying focused on the goal, building a sustainable business. Now, let's talk about metrics. In a startup, not all metrics are created equal. Ries draws a sharp line between vanity metrics and actionable metrics. Vanity metrics are the ones that make you feel good, but don't help you make decisions. Things like total downloads, page views, social media likes. They look nice on a slide deck, but they're often misleading. Here's an example. Suppose your app has 10,000 downloads. Sounds great, right? But what if only 200 users are active after a week? That's 2% retention. The download number means nothing if users aren't sticking around. On the other hand, actionable metrics tell you what's really going on. These are the numbers that connect cause and effect, so you can learn, adjust, and improve. Metrics like activation rate, what % of users take a key action. Retention rate, how many users come back. Referral rate, how often users bring in others. Conversion rate, how many users become paying customers. These metrics help you understand why something is working or not. To get meaningful results, Ries advocates for a cohort analysis over cumulative metrics. Instead of lumping all your users together, you track groups, cohorts, who started using your product around the same time. For example, you compare users who signed up in week 1, users who signed up in week 2, users who signed up in week 3. This shows whether your changes are actually improving retention or engagement over time. Cohort analysis cuts through the noise. If your cumulative retention rate is rising, it could be due to a handful of super active users. But if your week 3 cohort is performing better than week 2, you know your latest change worked. Rise also talks about split testing, or A/B testing. That means showing 2 versions of a product or feature to different users and measuring which one performs better. It's one of the fastest, most reliable ways to test hypotheses. Imagine you're trying to increase signups. You test 2 versions of your homepage, one with a Start Free Trial button, another with Get Started Now. You measure the sign-up rates. If one performs better, that's your winner. Small tweaks can lead to big insights. But remember, always test one thing at a time. If you change 5 things at once, you won't know which one made the difference. At its core, this chapter is a masterclass in disciplined decision-making. It reminds us that in a startup, progress is not about being busy. It's about moving in the right direction. And the only way to know you're moving forward is to measure what matters. Innovation accounting forces you to face reality. It removes the temptation to tell comforting stories or get lost in feel-good metrics. It grounds your startup in evidence, because in the end, your job as a founder isn't just to build, it's to learn what to build, and the only way to learn is to measure wisely. When you do that, every experiment becomes a step forward toward a product people love and a business that lasts. Chapter 8. Pivot or persevere. In startup life, there comes a moment, sometimes early, sometimes painfully late. When you stare at your dashboard, your user data, or your team's faces and ask, do we keep going or change course? That moment is the subject of this chapter. It's not just about tweaking features or adjusting marketing. It's about making one of the hardest decisions any founder will face. Do we pivot or persevere? Eric Ries starts with a simple truth. Even with the best MVPs, the smartest experiments, and the clearest data, many startups find themselves stuck. You've launched, you've learned, but growth is flat. Engagement is weak. Customers aren't thrilled. The feedback loops feel stale. And yet, because of pride, fear, or sheer exhaustion, you keep pushing, hoping the next update will be the breakthrough. But hope isn't a strategy. This chapter introduces the pivot as the most powerful tool in a startup's toolbox when things aren't working. But it's not just a panic move. A pivot is a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about your product, business model, or growth engine. Rise emphasizes that a pivot is not a failure. It's a sign of intelligence. It means you've been listening to your data. You've run the tests. You've learned. And now you're applying that learning to move in a better direction. Let's look at a real-world pivot story. Take Groupon. It didn't start out as the mega coupon deal platform we know today. It began as a social activism site called The Point, an online space where people could come together to raise money or take collective action. But nobody used it. Then one tiny part of the site started to take off. Group discounts. The team noticed that users cared less about activism and more about saving money together, so they pivoted. They stripped away everything that wasn't working and doubled down on what was. Groupon was born. That's the essence of a pivot. Focus, remove the noise, follow the signal. Rise lays out several types of pivots, each addressing a different core assumption. Zoom in pivot. One feature of the product becomes the whole product. It's the thing users care about most, so everything else is dropped. Zoom out pivot. The opposite. Your whole product becomes just a feature of something larger. Maybe your app isn't valuable enough on its own, but it shines as part of a bigger platform. Customer segment pivot. You realize your product is great, but for the wrong audience. You shift to serving a different group of users. Customer need pivot. You discover your target. Customer has a more pressing problem than the one you're solving, so you adjust your focus. Platform pivot. Your product becomes the base for others to build on, rather than just a standalone app. Business architecture pivot. You change your structure, maybe from high margin/low volume to low margin/high volume. Value capture pivot. You change how you make money. Maybe you move from one-time sales to subscriptions. Engine of growth pivot. You switch how you grow, virally, through paid ads, or by retaining long-term users. Channel pivot. You find a better way to reach your customers, maybe direct to consumer instead of retail, or mobile instead of desktop. Technology pivot. You keep the customer and the problem, but change the technology you use to solve it. Each of these pivots starts with one key thing: evidence. You don't pivot just because you're frustrated. You pivot because your data tells you something critical isn't working, and you have a better hypothesis to try. That's why Chapter 7, Measure, flows directly into Chapter 8. Your innovation accounting system should make this decision obvious. Either your metrics are improving with each iteration, or they're not. If they are, you persevere. If they're not, you pivot. But the decision isn't just data-driven, it's emotional. Founders often resist pivoting because they've invested time, money, and their identity into the original idea. It feels like giving up. Rise tackles this head-on. A pivot is not an admission of defeat. It's a badge of honesty. It means you're serious about solving a problem, not just building a product. To help founders make this decision more easily, Reese recommends scheduling pivot or persevere meetings at regular intervals, maybe every 6 weeks or after a major product release. The team gathers, reviews key metrics, and decides, are we on track? Are we learning fast enough? Is it time to shift? Having this rhythm prevents you from getting stuck in a fog of indecision. It builds a culture of accountability where learning is the North Star, not ego. One of the most powerful parts of this chapter is the idea that you don't pivot away from a vision, you pivot toward a better one. You're still chasing the same dream, you're just finding a smarter path to get there. Let's go back to Reese's company, IMVU. After realizing users didn't care about chat integrations, they pivoted. They focused on building their own standalone social network with avatars, dropping the whole concept of plugging into AEM or Yahoo Messenger. That pivot unlocked growth, user engagement, and ultimately success. It wasn't easy. It meant throwing away months of work, but it also meant real progress. Rise also warns about vanity pivots, when startups make small changes and call it a pivot just to appease investors or avoid tough conversations. A real pivot affects your business model. It's deep, strategic, bold. The opposite danger is death by iteration, making endless tweaks to a product that isn't working. When your experiments consistently show no improvement, it's time to stop iterating and make a bigger move. This chapter also touches on vision, a key ingredient in successful pivots. You need a strong vision to guide your decisions, but that vision shouldn't be tied to a specific product or tactic. Your vision is about the problem you want to solve, the change you want to make in the world. Great founders are stubborn about the vision and flexible about the path. That's the heart of this chapter. Perseverance without progress is stubbornness. Pivots without purpose are chaos. The real art is knowing which one your startup needs. Right now, when you get that call right, when you pivot with clarity and conviction, you give your startup the best possible chance to succeed. Because in the end, startups don't succeed because they nailed it on the first try. They succeed because they kept trying until they got it right. Chapter 9. Batch. Imagine you're cooking a new recipe for the first time. Would you make 100 servings before tasting even one bite? Probably not. You'd cook a small batch, taste it, and adjust the flavors as needed. That's the philosophy behind this chapter. In startups, as in cooking, small batches lead to faster feedback, better learning, and fewer costly mistakes. Eric Ries introduces the concept of batch size, a principle borrowed from lean manufacturing. In traditional industries, large batches were the norm. If you're printing newspapers or manufacturing car parts, it makes sense to produce in volume for efficiency. But in startups, where the goal is learning, large batches create waste. Let's say your team has a brilliant idea for a new onboarding flow. You spend 4 weeks designing it, coding it, testing it, and then you push it live. But once it's out in the wild, you realize something's wrong. Users are confused, drop-off increases, and retention tanks. Now you've wasted 4 weeks and possibly lost customers. Now imagine you tested that same idea in small steps. You build just the first screen, test it with real users, get feedback, then move on to the next. You're still heading toward the same destination, but now you're learning and adjusting every step of the way. That's small batch thinking. Ries explains that large batches are seductive. They feel productive. You check off lots of tasks. You build momentum. But what you're really doing is delaying feedback. And the longer it takes to get feedback, the more expensive mistakes become. In startups, delays aren't just costly. They're deadly. To make this real, Ries shares a story from IMVU. Early in the company, the engineers would write code for weeks before releasing it. They thought, let's fix everything first, let's make it perfect. But the result was long feedback cycles. When bugs did appear, and they always did, It was hard to trace the cause because so much had changed at once. Eventually, they shifted to releasing code multiple times a day in small chunks. Suddenly, when something broke, they knew exactly what caused it. Fixes were faster, quality improved, and they learned more with every release. This transition to continuous deployment, pushing updates constantly, sometimes multiple times a day, is a hallmark of small batch thinking. It turns product development into a feedback machine. Each small change is a mini experiment, and it's not just for code. Marketing teams can run small batch experiments too. Instead of spending 3 months crafting the perfect campaign, you run 5 micro tests, different headlines, landing pages, or offers, and see what resonates. Then you scale up what works. Rees also makes an important distinction between efficiency and effectiveness. In traditional thinking, batching tasks seems efficient. You reduce context switching. You do all your planning at once, then all your coding, then all your testing. But that's only efficient if every decision is correct. If you're wrong, you're now stuck with a massive batch of problems. Startups by nature don't know the right answer yet. So the priority isn't efficiency, it's learning. And small batches are the fastest way to learn. Rise brings in a powerful analogy from lean manufacturing, the andon cord at Toyota. On the assembly line, if a worker spots a defect, they can pull the cord to stop production immediately. This lets the team fix problems at the source, rather than letting flawed products pile up. In startups, the digital equivalent of the andon cord is continuous deployment combined with real-time analytics. You release small changes, watch what happens, and if something goes wrong, you stop, fix, learn, and move on. But many startups resist this. They fear small releases will seem unprofessional, or that customers will notice bugs, or that frequent changes might confuse users. Rise addresses these fears. Yes, small batches mean more frequent change. But done right, they're invisible to the customer. And the benefits, faster learning, quicker fixes, better products, far outweigh the risks. He also talks about the psychological impact of small batches. They reduce fear. When you're releasing a huge update, there's pressure. One mistake and everything could fall apart. Teams get nervous, testing gets bloated, launches get delayed. With small batches, the stakes are lower. You release something, see what happens, fix it, and repeat. It creates a rhythm, a culture of learning. It turns anxiety into momentum. One surprising benefit Rees points out is that small batches also improve quality. That might sound counterintuitive. Wouldn't lots of small changes lead to more bugs? Actually, the opposite is true. Because small changes are easier to test, easier to understand, and easier to fix. When something breaks, it's easier to isolate. Plus, developers get instant feedback on their work, which helps them improve faster. Another area where small batch thinking applies is customer service. Rees shares how IMVU's support team used to batch customer emails and respond once a week, but that created delays and frustration, so they switched to replying continuously throughout the day. It wasn't just better for customers, it gave the team real-time insight into what users were struggling with. That feedback loop made the product better too. So how do you apply this in your own startup? Start by looking at your workflow. Where are the batch processes? Are you writing code for weeks before testing? Are you planning campaigns without testing ideas in the wild? Are you releasing product updates in giant chunks? Then ask, what's the smallest unit of work we can ship, test, and learn from? That question alone can transform how you operate. Rise encourages founders to optimize for learning, not just output. That might mean slowing down in the short term to release smaller pieces more often. But in the long run, it accelerates everything because you're always learning, always improving. To close the chapter, Rees reminds us that startups aren't just about speed, they're about direction. Moving fast in the wrong direction doesn't help. Small batches help you course correct constantly. They keep you aligned with your customers, your data, and your vision. Because in a world where every assumption is up for debate, the only way to win is to test, learn, and adapt, one small step at a time. Chapter 10. Grow. Every startup wants growth, but not all growth is created equal. In this chapter, Eric Ries dives into the engines that power real, sustainable growth, and how startups can identify, measure, and optimize the one that fits them best. Ries starts with a sobering idea. Growth doesn't just happen, it has to be built into the product. Marketing gimmicks, splashy launches, and viral campaigns might create spikes in usage, but if they don't lead to long-term engagement, they're just noise. So what does real growth look like? Ries lays out 3 core engines of growth, each representing a different strategy startups use to acquire and retain customers over time. 1. The sticky engine of growth. This engine focuses on retention. The idea is simple. If your product delivers enough value, people will keep using it, and your user base will grow because fewer people leave. Let's say you have 1,000 users. Each month you gain 200 new users, but lose 100. That's positive growth. But if you're losing 200 as fast as you gain them, your product is stuck in neutral. Companies that run on the sticky engine obsess over metrics like churn rate, the percent of customers who stop using the product, daily/monthly active users, customer satisfaction and engagement. Great examples include Evernote, Notion, or fitness apps. If users rely on the product daily or weekly and the experience keeps them coming back, growth compounds naturally. To optimize the sticky engine, you don't need more users. You need better retention. Every feature, every fix, every decision should aim to increase customer lifetime value. 2. The viral engine of growth. This engine is about organic sharing. Users bring in other users as a natural part of using the product. Think Dropbox, Zoom, or WhatsApp, products that get more useful the more people you invite. Here, the key metric is the viral coefficient, the average number of new users brought in by each existing user. If each person invites 1.1 others, your user base will grow exponentially. If it's less than 1.0, you need external marketing to grow. But here's the catch. Viral growth has to be baked into the product experience, not bolted on. Just slapping a "share this" button won't do the trick. The act of sharing must create value for the user. For example, Dropbox offered extra storage space for every friend you referred. That wasn't just a gimmick, it gave users a real reason to share. The viral engine is powerful but fragile. Small changes in product design or user behavior can make it break down quickly. That's why startups using this engine must constantly experiment to keep the sharing loop strong. 3. The paid engine of growth. This engine relies on spending money to make money. You acquire customers through advertising, sales teams, or sponsorships. But for this engine to be sustainable, you need a simple equation to work in your favor. Customer lifetime value, LTV, greater than customer acquisition cost, CAC. If it costs you $50 to acquire a user, but they spend $150 over time, you've got a working engine. The larger the gap between LTV and CAC, the faster you can grow. This is the engine most startups gravitate toward because it's easy to understand, but it's also dangerous if misused. If you scale up paid marketing before you have product market fit, you're just pouring water into a leaky bucket. Companies that master this engine, like subscription services, SaaS tools, and e-commerce brands, often use deep data to optimize ad spend. target the right audiences, and increase conversion rates. Riez warns that paid growth is only sustainable if the math works. If your CAC creeps up or your retention drops, your growth engine stalls. That's why testing, tracking, and tweaking your funnel is non-negotiable. Switching engines. Can a startup switch engines? Yes, but it's risky. Rise cautions that switching engines too early can destroy momentum. Each engine requires different product features, business models, and team focus. If you're unsure which engine you're using, your startup may be spreading itself too thin. So how do you choose? It depends on your product, your audience, and how people discover and use what you offer. The key is to pick one engine and optimize it relentlessly. Improve it, tweak it, test it. Don't hedge. Don't split your energy. Once you've maxed out one engine, and only then, consider layering in others. Understanding compounding growth. Rise brings in a concept many founders overlook: compounding. Real startup growth isn't a hockey stick that comes out of nowhere. It's usually the result of small, consistent improvements. Better onboarding, better targeting, higher retention, stacked on top of each other. Each win adds momentum. Each test teaches something. It's like pushing a flywheel, slow at first, but with enough effort, it spins on its own. This is why vanity metrics can be so misleading. They might show you 10,000 new users from a PR bump, but if those users vanish a week later, you haven't grown. Sustainable growth comes from solving real problems, building trust, and improving over time. The engines in action. To illustrate how these engines play out in real life, Reese revisits IMVU. At first, the team didn't know which growth engine they were using. They tried a bit of everything: ads, referrals, feature updates, but they weren't measuring it clearly. Eventually, they realized they were mostly growing through the sticky engine. People who liked IMVU kept using it and inviting others. But churn was high. So they stopped focusing on new features and started focusing on keeping users engaged. That shift made all the difference. The role of innovation accounting. Your growth engine should be tied directly to your innovation accounting system from Chapter 7. That means you track metrics tied to your engine. You run experiments to improve them. You pivot if the engine isn't working after multiple adjustments. If your viral coefficient is stuck at 0.7 after 5 feature changes, maybe you're using the wrong engine. If your CAC keeps rising, maybe your paid engine isn't sustainable. The goal is to measure what works, test what doesn't, and grow with purpose. Final takeaway: growth is seductive. Every founder wants the graph to shoot up, but the only growth that matters is sustainable, repeatable, and scalable. That doesn't come from luck. It comes from building the right product for the right people with the right strategy. Pick your engine, master it, and don't chase growth until your product earns it. Because in startups, growth isn't a goal, it's a result of deep learning, focused execution, and relentless iteration. Chapter 11. Adapt. Startups live on the edge of chaos. Things change fast. Customer needs evolve. New competitors emerge. Assumptions fall apart. What separates successful startups from the rest isn't their ability to predict the future. It's their ability to adapt to it. In this chapter, Eric Ries tackles a powerful idea. Building a startup isn't just about creating great products. It's about building a learning organization, a company that can respond quickly to changes, internal and external, and use them to its advantage. He opens with a story from IMVU. Early in the company's life, the team was shipping code like crazy, fast, raw, and often broken. They believed that speed was everything. But customers kept running into bugs, and confidence in the product started to erode. The team responded with a classic startup move. They created rules. More testing, more reviews, slower release cycles. And guess what? The bugs kept happening. That's when Reese had a realization. Rules don't create quality. Feedback does. No matter how many processes you put in place, if they don't lead to real-time learning and adjustment, they won't improve performance. In fact, they might make things worse by slowing everything down. So how do you build a team and a company that adapts? Rise introduces a few critical principles. 1. Build a culture of accountability. In large organizations, accountability often means blame. If something goes wrong, someone gets fired. But in a startup, that kind of thinking kills innovation. You need a culture where people own their decisions, learn from mistakes, and get better every time. This means tracking progress transparently, not with vanity metrics or vague KPIs, but with real numbers that reflect customer behavior, learning, and growth. Rise recommends setting up clear learning milestones. For example, we'll consider this feature a success if it increases weekly retention by 15% in the next 30 days. If the goal isn't met, it's not a failure. It's a chance to learn, adapt, and try again. When everyone on the team sees progress this way, finger-pointing disappears. What replaces it? Continuous improvement. 2. Use the 5 whys. One of the most powerful tools Reese shares in this chapter is something borrowed from Toyota, the 5 whys. It's a technique for getting to the root cause of any problem. Here's how it works. A problem occurs. You ask why 5 times in a row. Each answer leads you deeper into the true source of the issue. Let's say your app crashes on launch. Why? The server went down. Why? A new feature overwhelmed the system. Why? The code wasn't tested for high loads. Why? The team didn't know it was high risk. Why? There's no checklist for testing load impact before release. Now you're not just fixing a bug, you're fixing a system weakness. The power of the 5 whys is that it creates organizational learning. It prevents teams from just patching surface-level issues and encourages fixing the real root causes. But Reese issues a warning. If done poorly, the 5 whys can become a blame game. If each why points at a person instead of a process, the culture breaks down. That's why trust is essential. When used well, though, this tool can radically improve how teams adapt. It creates a reflex of digging deeper, not reacting, but responding intelligently. 3. Create adaptive teams. Startups move fast, but they can't afford chaos. The solution? Structure that supports agility, not rigidity. Rise shares how teams at IMVU were organized into small cross-functional units, each responsible for a part of the customer experience. These teams had full autonomy over their area. Feature releases, experiments, customer support. They were expected to test ideas, ship improvements, and learn constantly. But they weren't left to drift. They were held accountable through innovation accounting, tracking meaningful metrics like activation rates or revenue per customer. This balance, freedom to act plus pressure to learn, is the secret sauce. Adaptive teams aren't micromanaged. They're aligned. Everyone knows what success looks like. Everyone knows how they're being measured, and they have the tools and autonomy to experiment their way toward that goal. 4. Embrace small failures to avoid big ones. In a traditional company, failure is avoided at all costs. Projects get stuck in committees. Risk is minimized. Progress slows. In a startup, failure is inevitable. So the goal is to fail fast and small, to learn quickly and avoid massive disasters later. This means constantly testing assumptions, even if they feel minor. Rise argues that small failures, like a landing page test that doesn't convert, are actually successes if they reveal valuable insights. It's the big failures, launching a product nobody wants, spending months building unused features that are truly dangerous. The companies that adapt are the ones that learn from little failures every day instead of ignoring them until it's too late. 5. Standardize what works, improve what doesn't. Adaptation isn't chaos. Once something works, really works, you should lock it in. Document the process, create a checklist, make it repeatable, but don't stop improving. Use metrics to spot bottlenecks. Run new tests. Challenge assumptions. This dual mindset, stability and experimentation, is what keeps startups agile as they grow. At IMVU, for example, the team standardized their release process once it proved successful. Every engineer could ship code to production, but they still ran small experiments daily. The system wasn't rigid, it was resilient. The heart of adaptation, learning. This chapter boils down to one simple idea. A startup is a learning machine. The product, the team, the culture, everything exists to support faster, deeper learning, and learning only happens when you're willing to adapt. Adaptation isn't about abandoning your vision. It's about refining the path to get there. It's about taking what the world throws at you, customer complaints, failed features, surprising insights, and folding it back into your strategy. Rees ends the chapter with a powerful message. Startups don't die from moving too fast. They die from failing to adapt. The ones that survive aren't the ones who make no mistakes. They're the ones who build a system that learns from every mistake and comes back stronger. Adaptation is the startup's superpower, not prediction, not perfection, but learning. Constant, messy, honest learning. And in a world that changes faster every day, that's the only advantage that lasts. Chapter 12. Innovate. Innovation. It's the lifeblood of every startup and the promise that draws in investors, inspires founders, and fuels disruption. But here's the uncomfortable truth Eric Ries lays bare in this final chapter. Most companies kill innovation without even trying. Not with sabotage or bad intentions, but with slow processes, unclear goals, and a culture that's terrified of failure. This chapter is about how to build an organization, whether a 5-person startup or a 5,000-employee giant, that can innovate consistently, that can deliver new ideas to market, test them quickly, and scale what works. Not once, not as a lucky accident, but as a repeatable system. Ries starts by challenging the myth of the lone genius, the idea that innovation comes from some magical visionary working in isolation, waiting for a eureka moment. That's not how successful companies operate. Great innovation is structured chaos. It's messy, yes, but it's also built on a foundation of discipline, process, and feedback. Without those, you don't get innovation, you get waste. The startup inside the corporation. Here's the problem. Most established companies are built for execution, not experimentation. They have hierarchies, quarterly targets, brand guidelines, legal reviews, systems designed to reduce variability, not embrace it. Startups are the opposite. They thrive on uncertainty. They move fast. They break things. That's how they learn. So when big companies want to innovate, they often bolt on a small innovation team, give them a flashy title, and then crush them with corporate process. Ries argues the solution isn't to kill the rules. It's to carve out space where those rules don't apply. He calls it the sandbox for innovation. The sandbox for innovation. This idea is simple but powerful. Give your innovation team room to run, but keep them accountable to real learning. Here's what a sandbox looks like. The team can launch a product to a limited number of customers, say 100 or 1,000. They can change features, pricing, design, anything needed to test their hypotheses. But they must track clear, actionable metrics, and they must report back regularly on what they've learned. This approach protects the core business from risky ideas while protecting the innovation team from the corporate immune system. And it works. Ries gives the example of a large company that wanted to test a new pricing model. Instead of running it through endless approvals, they launched it within the sandbox. Just a small set of users, no risk to the broader brand. They learned quickly, adjusted, and eventually rolled it out company-wide with confidence. That's what innovation needs: freedom and focus. A new role for leaders. For innovation to thrive, leaders have to change how they lead. In traditional companies, leaders focus on planning, budgeting, and execution. But in innovation, leaders must become portfolio managers, overseeing multiple experiments, each at different stages of maturity. It's not about picking winners up front. It's about funding small experiments, letting them prove themselves, and doubling down on what works. Rise compares this to venture capital. VCs know that most startups will fail, but the few that succeed will pay for the rest. The same logic should apply inside companies. Most new ideas won't work, but the ones that do can change everything. So instead of asking, "Will this idea succeed?" leaders should ask, "What have you learned? What will you test next? What's the riskiest assumption you're trying to validate?" This shift in mindset, from knowing to learning, is critical. It makes innovation a process, not a gamble. Building the innovation system. RISE outlines a few key building blocks for making innovation sustainable inside any organization. 1. Dedicated teams. Innovative projects need their own teams, not borrowed staff who split their time. These teams need autonomy, clarity of mission, and the right skills to build, measure, and learn. 2. Real deadlines. Not arbitrary launch dates, but learning milestones. Things like validate that customers will use feature X within 30 days. These deadlines create urgency and focus without demanding perfection. 3. Fast feedback loops. Weekly check-ins, daily metrics, rapid experiments. If a team goes 3 weeks without learning something new, that's a red flag. The engine of innovation must stay in motion. 4. Cross-functional collaboration. Designers, developers, marketers, data scientists, everyone needed to build and test an idea should be in the room from day one. No handoffs, no silos, just speed and shared ownership. Innovation accounting revisited. Earlier in the book, Rees introduced innovation accounting, metrics that track learning and progress when revenue and profits don't yet exist. In this chapter, he expands on how corporate innovation must use the same principles. Start with a baseline, current customer behavior. Run experiments to improve a metric. Pivot or persevere based on results. These metrics might be conversion rates, sign-up to activation rates, monthly active users, customer referrals. They aren't fluffy or optional. They're the scoreboard for your innovation efforts. If a project isn't improving key metrics, or worse, not measuring anything, it's not innovating. It's playing pretend. Institutionalizing innovation. The final part of the chapter and the book is about scale. It's not enough to have one good innovation team. Rees wants to help organizations build a system where innovation happens everywhere, all the time. That means training people in lean startup principles, and it means rewarding learning, not just success. It means creating career paths for innovators, so they don't have to leave the company to bring ideas to life. And it means protecting space for experimentation, even when times are tough. Especially when times are tough, because the companies that endure, really endure, aren't the ones that execute perfectly. They're the ones that adapt, evolve, and reinvent themselves before the world forces them to. Final takeaway. Innovation isn't magic. It's not a lightning bolt. It's not just something creative people do. It's a discipline, a process, a muscle. The lean startup isn't just a method for new founders. It's a blueprint for every organization that wants to grow, evolve, and survive in a fast-changing world. If you build a culture of learning, Create systems that reward experimentation and give teams the space to run. You can innovate consistently, sustainably, at scale, because in the end, innovation doesn't come from guessing the future. It comes from testing it, one small, smart experiment at a time. Epilogue. Waste not. The lean startup isn't just about building businesses, it's about changing the way we build everything. In this closing epilogue, Eric Ries zooms out and asks a deeper question. What if we lived in a world where no human effort was wasted? It's a bold vision. Every day around the world, thousands of people go to work on products no one wants, features no one needs, and services that don't solve real problems. It's not for lack of talent or dedication. It's because we often chase the wrong things. We equate progress with motion, activity with achievement, speed with success. But what if we could change that? What if every entrepreneur, employee, and innovator started by asking, are we solving a real problem? Are we learning what matters? That shift away from blind building and toward validated learning could change not just startups, but corporations, governments, nonprofits, and even schools. Ries argues that the principles of the lean startup aren't limited to Silicon Valley or venture-backed tech companies. They're universal. They apply to any team trying to create something new under conditions of uncertainty. A city trying to improve public transit, a nonprofit testing new ways to feed more people, a teacher designing a new curriculum. All of them face the same core challenge: how to learn what works before running out of resources. And that's the deeper purpose of the lean startup: to eliminate waste. Waste of time, waste of talent, waste of dreams. Ries recalls the feeling he had at IMVU when he realized how much effort had been poured into features that no one used. It wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking, and it's happening everywhere. Brilliant people, passionate about their ideas, working in the dark. The lean startup shines a light. It gives creators a compass. Build only what you need to learn. Measure what really matters. Learn fast. Pivot smart. Persevere with purpose. That's how you build companies. That's how you build careers. That's how you build a future that doesn't waste human potential. Ries closes with a call to action. He invites us to become lean leaders, whether we're founders, product managers, marketers, engineers, or policymakers. He wants us to spread this mindset, because the more people use it, the more impact we can create. Faster, smarter, with less waste. The lean startup started as a response to one simple frustration. Why are we wasting so much time building the wrong things? Now it's become a movement, a philosophy, a toolkit for anyone who wants to build something meaningful. Because when we stop wasting effort and start learning what really works, we don't just build better startups, we build a better world. And there it is, the blueprint for turning uncertainty into unstoppable momentum. The lean startup isn't just a guide to launching a business. It's a mindset shift for creators, innovators, and problem solvers who want to build smarter, faster, and with less waste. Let's recap the biggest game changers from Eric Ries's revolutionary approach. Start with a minimum viable product so you can test real ideas, not just dream them. Measure what truly matters. Ditch vanity metrics and focus on validated learning. Build, measure, learn, your new loop for continuous data-driven innovation. Pivot or persevere based on real evidence, not ego or emotion. Create a system for innovation so new ideas don't just survive, they thrive. But knowing isn't enough. The real power of this book lies in action. What can you do today? Maybe it's designing your first MVP, running a micro test on a product idea, or starting a weekly learning review with your team. Whatever it is, start now. Because the sooner you learn, the faster you grow. If this summary sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe for more insights on building, learning, and leading in a fast-changing world. And tell us, what's the biggest lesson the Lean Startup taught you? Drop a comment or tag us on social media. We'd love to hear your story. Remember, the future doesn't belong to those who build perfectly. It belongs to those who build, test, learn, and keep moving. See you in the next episode.